To Cloudflare, the number of REST API has increased dramatically in the last year. There's a 20% increase between February to December. And what is surprising is the type of API. If you look at that, most of the traffic is again a post operation, which means they are making some state changes in your data, in complete data. So it's a post request, changing of the state of data. So that's most of the API request is. And the next set of API are the get operation, which is reading the data. So to me, this is a little bit surprising because updating data require we make sure the data, the user who's making the update is authorized to do the update and they have authenticate to allow to do the update. In addition to that, the application that the user has to use also has to be allowed to perform the operations. And another thing which is surprisingly is the industry which is using the API. Most of them are banking and financial services. Those two has a highly regulated government body. They have to conform to, for example, PCI for retail. Banking, there'll be PSD2 and open banking. So again, there's all the security compliances that when they host an API that the company has to conform to. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about how Ibm API Connect is going to help this space. Ibm API Connect is a lifecycle managing of the API and provides some governance and also provide a runtime. So it made up of 4 major components. The management subsystem, which customer can create the topology, like where to register a gateway and where to create a portal and how to communicate with them, right? So you can stand those up. In addition to that, manager subsystem is also where the API developers go in to create the API. An API developer, so you have to limit who can create the API because those API represent your company. So that's where the management subsystem is. It's the brain of the whole system. Now, once the API has been created, you want applications developer to be able to access the API. So that's where the portal subsystem comes in which the application developer can log in and look at your API catalog to see maybe there's some API they want to consume into the applications. So this is where they register applications with your system and then consume your API. So that's where the portal subsystem comes in. And okay, so once the application is created, the API is created, all those information need to push to the runtime. That is where the gateway subsystem comes in. So all the data got pushed to the gateway, and now if your customer download the mobile app that your company hosted, now they can start using, like maybe starting withdrawing money if it's a banking app. Right? If it's a traveling app, they might be able to start booking the airline ticket. So while they're doing all those applications, while they're doing all those API calls, it would be good to audit that, right? So if they Bob decided to purchase a ticket to go to Canada, in that case, you might want to audit that event on when that happened. So that's where the analytics subsystem comes in. So analytics subsystem with a list of the historical of what the API has been called, and this can help you fine-tune the API for the next generation. It can also help you to look at any suspicious behavior, right? Any anomaly when how the API is being used. So this is how the API Connect makeup of the 4 major system would help you in this case. Now, quickly, we're going to talk about security for each components. The management subsystem is where you create the topology. So you have to make sure the people create the topology is a trusted entity, right? The administrator, they know where the gateway is going to be residing at. Are they in the DMC or inside DMC, right? And also the people who create the topology might be different from the people who's creating the API again. So each user who come into a subsystem, they need to be given a certain role, and each role will tie to permission, right? And API manager itself, we are also, drinking our own champagne. So we also use the standard base for all the support we have. Internally, we support Oauth too. So for any user coming into our system, they have to get an Oauth token, which tied to the application, either toolkit or web UI, tied to the user. And once they did that, we generate a token which asserts user identity. And this token also tied to what the user role is, which gives them what the user permission is allowed to do. And with the management system, right, because we set up like which user registry to onboard the user, and how the API is being configured. Those are all sensitive data. So we also make sure that the data address is encrypted, right? And in addition to that, when management subsystem communicate to portal to let portal know here's a list of API that application developer can use, all those information is transferred in a secure manner in MTLS or over TLS, right? And in addition to that, any changes to management subsystem, for example, if Bob decided to create an API, or Alice decided to retire an API, all those can be audited. So you have an audit trail of who has done those system type of like governance type of work. In addition to that, if Alice decided to create stand-up gateway, these actions will also be audited too. So in addition, we also audit the lifecycle when you retire API, when you do applications. So those will be audited as part of the events. Now, once you create all this awesome API, now you want to expose those API to the developers. Now, it depends on the type of developers you have. Some of the developers might be internal to your enterprise, right? So if you create some API exposing human resources data, you don't want those API to be exposed to external developers. So those will be the developer only to your enterprise, right? However, if you design another set of API like your marketing material, those information should be exposed to external developer. Then there'll be another set of security requirements for those. They might be coming in through Google, they might be coming through LinkedIn for your external developer versus your internal developer, which might be coming through enterprise Ldap, right? So the user registry and how you authenticate the user, it really depends on authenticate the developers. It really depends on what kind of developers you're trying to target into, right? So once you figure out what kind of developer you want to target to, you also have to make the decision whether the developer should be self-registered. So if you're trying to expose an API for external consumption, developer from Canada, Europe, Japan, Asia, so you want the API to be used by anyone else, then you might want those developers to be self-registered. If you have certain API that only limited to European region, for example, then you want to maybe managing who can onboard, right? Who are the developer who can use those API. In addition to that, when you're publishing API, you can also say this API should only be allowed to certain sets of audience. So you can also have the fine tune to drive how your API being exposed to developers. So now let's talk about API now. API itself, we have different types. We have the REST-based, which is the HTTP-based, and in addition to that, we also have GraphQL. GraphQL is a query-based language. It has its own security signature. The newer generation is the async API, and we will have a talk about the async API later on today or tomorrow. So if you are interested, please do consider joining. Now, doesn't matter if it's a REST API, GraphQL, or Kafka, right? Each one of them has a request and response. The request might be different because GraphQL, you might be asking Shiu-Fun's departments or the employee belong to that department and what are the first name and last name. So the request will be driven by the application user, right? For the REST side, the request will be driven by the API developer. So each one of them is a somewhat well-known request and response that will come back. Right? And within that request and response, there are different type data types. For example, you have if you have an integer, like for example, the ID could be a number. If it's a number, then you have to worry about the overflow, right? You don't want the integers to overflow the maximum integer value. If you have a field called username typically may be 512 character long. So if a request comes in with the username with 1 gig of character, they might want to reject that request. So each data type has its own unique signature to that. In addition to that, right, the whole payload, the whole request payload and the response payload, again, there's also a unique signature to that, right? So the request might be maximum size maybe 124 bytes versus like 1 gigabyte. So all those have to go into the security side of this API that you have to think about. In addition to that, the API that you're exposing, right, the information that API is going to provide, are they sensitive? Do they have PII information? If it's open banking, does it need to conform to certain kind of standard, right? So again, what are the information being exposed? Are they sensitive? Now, next to that is when the application call your API, what are the complexity for your API to fulfill that request? In the GraphQL example, right, if you are asking for Shiu-Fun's departments, all the people belong to that department first and then last thing, as you can tell, there's a nested, there's lots of loop going on in there. So in order to meet that requirement for that API, it's a very complicated and also it's very require lots of CPU resources and database lookup in the backend. So the complexity of the API is high. So if that is the case, then you might want to put some rate limit against the API. Okay? So you might want that API to be run maybe 10 times a minute versus 1,000 times a minute if you just put sending a file. Right? So again, the complexity also drives this API to be protected. Once you create the API, you have to worry about what are the consumer of the API, what kind of application signature it has to be, right? Is the information public and the application might just need to be protected with App ID? However, if the information requires user data sensitive to each user, then you might require OAuth, in which the application needs to get the user permission to access the API. Right? Again, the user-sensitive data. Now we just talk about the API security. Let's talk about application security. Application security also depends on what type of application it is, right? If it's a public applications, then you just need maybe just the application ID, which is like a username. There's no secret there. For next level, it might be define application ID app secret, in which it gives a little bit security, but not too much. Right? So if the API also require end user information, then you might need the OAuth now, because the OAuth would tie the application to the user consent in order to get that data. Right? So it depends on what kind of application you need. The application authentication would came out from that. Now, in addition to that, for certain very sensitive secure applications, you might demand user TLS. So in addition to App ID and App Secret, you might also demand the application to do mutual TLS in order to get the data from that API. So you can also configure Ibm API Connect to do that. Now, once you decide what the application security is, then the next level is if the application, the API also need the end user data, then you need to figure out how to authenticate the user, right? To authenticate user, the username and password, and then it could base on other token type, JWT, SAML, Omega, right? So we can go over some of those when we go through the playback. So this just summarizes what I talked about earlier, the different security mechanism on how you protect the API. Open API, which is the standard, defines some sets. But Ibm API Connect enforcement gateway provide a lot more than that. So as you can see, we have like Omega, we have Kerberos, we have SAML, for example. Now, here are some of the best practices, which we can go over as we are doing the workshop. Some of the best practices is making sure you separate your application traffic from your management traffic. So it's a no-brainer there. And then we do support TLS 1.3. If it is feasible, do enable TLS 1.3 for your application, especially if you are doing MTLS. And then application credential check, let's talk about that. So now, I'm also, hopefully in this workshop, I'm going to demo some of the class policy and also rate limit policy and some of the auditing features. So, and also allow and buffers. So we're going to quickly go over that. Okay, let's get started with the demo. Oh. Okay, so let's see. Let me try whether I can share again. So I'm doing the demo right now, and let's do this. Okay. Can you see the sharing right now? Okay. let me know. Okay, now that let's get started with the demo. So I'm sorry about that earlier. So I'm launching API Connect, and as a cloud manager, I'm going to show some of the topology that I mentioned earlier. So once you log into Cloud Manager, you can configure. So this is the topology is mentioning how you want to set up your gateway, how you want to set up the portal. So in this case, I set up a gateway and a portal here. Right? And in addition to that, I was also mentioning each user coming with a given roles, and each role will give you a different permission. So if you look at the topology, we can have, by default, we have a set of roles, like the one who can configure the administrator, and the topology administrator, or just a member of this organization, right? So each one of those, if you crack open that, and each one of those will have its own permission base. So for example, for administrator, they can manage the member and set up the topology. And if the role doesn't work for you, you can also create a custom role, right? So if you have a custom role, you can specify how you want this. Maybe this can stop the cloud setting, which is the topology, and you can create a provider auth, right? So I can create a new role here if I want to. So that's one I would like to show. And then the next thing is, again, use the registry tools. You want to onboard the user. In this case, API Manager support different types of user registry. We support OIDC, Ldap, right? So in this example, I'm going to show you how to create. I'll show you an Ldap user registry that has been created. So in this Ldap user registry, we are after the IBM Ldap, and then in this, and you will be using the Ldap protocol to authenticate the user. Now for the OIDC user registry, which you use for portal and use for developer, you can also specify what are the provider endpoint, and all you need is the client ID and client secret, which I already configured here. So now let's get started and create an API now. For that, we would like, because I would like to go ahead and use the OAuth. So let's go ahead and create OAuth provider. And we'll create OAuth provider. Let's go ahead and create IBM native OAuth provider. And then let's go ahead and native OAuth. And then we want to use the new API gateway. And let's go next. And then here's the endpoint. And for this one, for the ease of use, I'm just going to use the resource owner brand type, so it doesn't have to do the three-legged dance. I'm going to do this right permission. So this allows me to do an update. And then let's go ahead and create another script, which is the read permission, right? Which allow me to read the information. Okay. And then here is how we want to authenticate the user. So in this case, I'm trying to use basic auth. Okay. I'm going to use maybe auth URL. Okay. And then that should be it. And password grant type, the same thing. I'm going to use the auth URL. Able to finish. So now I just create OAuth token, OAuth provider that will be run on the API gateway. So if you look at this, it's pretty easy. This is our endpoint authorization endpoint and token endpoint. Here is the grant type that this OAuth provider will support. In addition to that, the scope that this will support read and write operation. The user security is namely, I'm going to do a base auth against this auth URL endpoint. The token that it will be generated, the access token will be time to live will be about an hour. So let's go ahead and enable this. Now, the OAuth provider is created, and before I forget, let's look at what is our user registry first to see who are the end user. Okay, so I can use Google, so it could be anyone. And do this. So now let's go ahead and create a provider or so we can host an API. So in this case, I'm going to short circuit this. I'm going to create a provider or called API date. And I'm going to create a new user. So in this case, I'm just going to create one. And then I'm going to have so now I have created provider or now. So now I should be able to go in and create an API. So let's go ahead and log in as that provider or. So oops, I forgot my password already. Okay, now that I have created provider or, I'm logging in as the owner of the provider or. And let's create an API. If I do that, so I want to show a couple settings. So now I'm in a provider org now, so I can create API. Within the provider org, the same thing, right? You can set up different members into it. You can invite member to with different roles in here. So again, we're using role-based access management for that. And then in addition to that, if you look at the resources, right, we're using the OAuth provider here. And here's the OAuth provider that we created earlier. And the user registry for the end user authentication is this one. So now let's go ahead and use Sandbox. Sandbox is where we're going to hosting this API. So I'm going to enable the portal that will allow our application developer to come in to use our awesome API that we'll be using. And in addition to that, I am also going to enable the gateway services. I want to make sure I'm using API gateway, which is here. And also I want to make sure the OAuth provider that I created can be used, right? So I want to enable this too. And the API user registry will be, again, the API user registry that we authenticate the end user with. We also want to make sure it's being used, it can be used here. Now with everything's done, let's go ahead and create API. So I'm going to create an API, and then I'm just going to create from the, let's go ahead and new API here. Luckily, I do have one that I can use. Okay, so I'm going to have a pastor YAML. Just this. Okay, so it has been uploaded. I'm going to activate this API. Okay, so now let's go ahead and remember the client ID and client secret that we needed for this running of the API. So the client ID is now once we hit that, now we can go ahead and edit the API now. So we're going to start building the security into this. So remember earlier I was mentioning depends on what kind of API you're using. Some of them can be protected with just app ID, and some of those you might want the app ID app secret, and some of those you want the OAuth. So in this case, we are just going to play with the app ID and OAuth in this case. So if you look at the path, we have, in this case, we have two paths. We have a path which has an operation, get operation, and a post operation. And then for those, we're going to have a different security. And so before we do that, we need to define a security schema first. Right? So let's do that first. So in this case, let's use the API key first, right? So in this, we are going to specify API key to be API key. And then after that, what kind of key type? This is a client ID, right? We're saying this is going to be application key. And we're going to say this one's going to locate the header. Here is what we want the header name to be. So let's go ahead and call this one API days. Okay, PID. So this will be our header name that we're going to use. So we have one now. And then let's go ahead and create a second security schema. And this will be for the Oauth. So let's go ahead and say for this one, let's go ahead and choose Oauth 2. And then with this Oauth 2, then we need to specify which flow. And for the ease of flow, we're just going to use the resource owner granted, right? Again, here's the path. Okay, I'm going to create. Okay, now we have, remember this Oauth have the read write operation. So let's go ahead and set this one up. So for this one API, for the get operation, this I believe is to get a list of the API. So let's go ahead and set the security for this one to be protected by API key. Right. So this one be API key. So with this, let's go ahead and try to run it. So here's the endpoint, and something I'm screen because I'm a BI user. So let's go ahead and do the screen sharing for the whole screen. Entire screen. Okay, sure. Okay, so for that, everything. So I hope everyone can see this. Okay, so if that's so, let's go ahead and do a call. Endpoint header. We say this is the key that we've decided to be is API key, and the value for that would be the client ID. Voila, so we got the data. So to make it better, so JQ, so you can see we got the data coming back. So now if we decided to give this, but we give the wrong client, then we should get the wrong information. So we prove that this works. Now next, let's go back to change it now. So now we have one. For the next operation, which is the post operation, right? This, you know what? I think let's go ahead and do this. Let's change this one. Instead of using API key now, let's go ahead and use the Oauth, right? So let's go ahead and create a security requirement. This time we're going to use Oauth, except this is a read operation, right? So let's go ahead. We just need the scope for the read in this case. Let's go ahead and save this again. Now, once we save this, now we have to get the access token first. So in order to get the access token, so let's go ahead and do this. And we have to use the call. Okay. -k, and then we need the HTTP. I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to get the sandbox. So I'll do that. Sandbox Oauth 2 token. And that this is a grant type will be password grant type. So we're going to do that again. And then, and since we want the read operation, we want to do that with the client ID being this. Client ID and client secret to be so let's go ahead and see. Let's get us access token so we can access in this here. Okay, so this is not fine. So let's see where's API. Okay, let's make sure we got that correct. Let's look at the Oauth definition first. Again, go back to the resources. Oauth provider. Let's look at the native Oauth provider to make sure I got everything correct. So it has a path here, native Oauth. So that's why. So now let's get to our call. So we have the native Oauth in here. Okay, so this is again is the client ID and client secret is not correct. So let's go ahead and look at our current client ID 1A. I did not copy it correctly. That's why. Okay, so here's our client ID. And look at the client ID. Okay. And then let's go ahead and this is native. Okay. Okay, so now subscribe to this. Let's make sure it got correct. 6 something. Put it right and cancel it. Put it back. Okay. Okay, so we are still having a problem. So let's look at the application itself now. When we do this, you can look at the sandbox, and within the sandbox, we have an application. So within the application, you have client ID and client secret, and within this, we can look at the credentials. So here's the credential that we're supposed to have. But since API Connect will not store the client secret in the clear, so it's a hash value, so it's useful to us. So let's go ahead and create brand new credentials. This way we know for sure we got the right client ID and right secret associated with each one of them. So here's the client ID, and here's the client secret. And that's the client secret. Let's go ahead and delay. Yeah, let's try again with client ID. And the client secret. Perfect. So let's go ahead and try to get this token. Of course, with our luck, luckily there is, you know what, I forgot to save it. Okay, so let's go ahead and try again. Okay. We're still having a technical difficulty here. Let's look at the resources, which is the user registry. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a brand new user registry for this purpose only, so we can remove some of the concern that we have, because the user registry being created was not a good one. Let's use this. And we can go ahead and use this one. And then so now we have a real username here. And now we have that, and we're going to create the Oauth provider again. And this time we're going to create a provider on the scope of API manager. So you have multiple options. the OAuth provider can be created on the top level or can create on the lower level. So in this case, I'm actually curious on this one now, because this is it should be working. I wonder where they got timeout. Because we do have a network issue here earlier at work. Let's go ahead and connect to this. Okay, perfect. So let's go and do this. Okay, so while we are doing that, I would like to show the API itself. So when we look at the API, in the gateway side, so the one that we have been looking at, the API that we have been running on earlier is called the it's called paths, right? It's a get operation against the path. So if you look at the operation switch, that will be this guy. This will be this API. So in this API cases, what we can do is provide additional security, right? So we can, in theory, we can also add a rate limit. Remember I mentioned it earlier, if an API takes a long time to run, you might want to use a rate limit to limit how many times the API can be run. So we have a rate limit policy in which you can say you want a rate limit as part of the plan. So you can create a plan in which you have a rate limit plan, right? So the limit 30, right? So you can do that, and then the operation will be replenished. Right? So you can do this if you want. So now, next thing which I would like to show is while the OAuth is still going through is tremendous delay, which I think is that's a networking issue going on there. Let's look on some other feature that we would like to show you. One of the feature is let's look at the path policy, right? So I'm going to create another operation. So if you look at the design, we have a couple paths. One is the path, one is the echoing path. So let's look at the echoing path, and we can use this to test out other security that we can use. So I'm going to have operation switch. With the operation switch, I'm going to create a new operation. I'm going to say, I'm going to add a case, and this case will be for the echoing. Okay, and then for the echoing, let me go back here. I'm going to close this because we don't really care about the final per se. Okay, so on the echoing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we use the Ldap policy. And I'm going to invoke the endpoint. The endpoint is really easy. HTTP test http://pin.org. Yeah, okay, so that's all it does. It actually just sends you the data and echoing what the response will be like. That's all. So let's go ahead and save this API and we'll see what it does. And then before we do that, we should also so let's go ahead and move this offline and bring it online again to make sure it's okay. Okay. Okay, I think our networking issue might be still continuous, but let's try to see whether this will get past. Let's see whether we can get the path through this. Okay, so we've looked at our security for the path. Let's add a security definition for this tab. And the operations again, operation. Let's go ahead and add the security definition. Let's use the F key only. Let's save this. And I think this is the echoing, right? So let's go ahead and see what the echo does. So again, we're using the API key, and then we're using the echo. Okay, so I think in this case, unfortunately, it seems like we're having a problem with our internal network at the moment, and we're not able to bring the data online. Okay, so let's go ahead and figure out. Okay, so if that's the case, let's go ahead and walk through what our, so I apologize for that. Let's walk through what I was mentioning in the call earlier, some of the security operation. We can just look at what they can do. So in what I was originally planning to show is in the invoke policy, if you look at the invoke policy, you have a couple of options in here. The couple options is you can do allow list and block list, right? So you can control what other header you can go to the back. So I can say a block list, I might decide to block the host header to the back because host header is a security sensitive data, right? And also, if I decided maybe I also want to do an allow list, maybe allow the X client ID, right? So you can also use allow list and block list to drive what other data you want to send to the backend. Now, one thing that I do want to show is also using the invoke policy, assuming our gateway come back up due to our infrastructure problem. And there is also a pass policy, right? So if you look at the pass policy, again, we have toggle rate limit, and there's our pass policy. Okay, there we go. So the pass policy, if you look at that, what the pass policy would do is I can configure the setting. Right? So remember I was talking about how big the document has to be. So I can say this is a JSON. Whatever the data coming in, it has to be JSON data. The maximum size of the data could be 1024, right? So you can configure here 1024. And then here's the nested depth, right? So it's a JSON or the GraphQL. I mean, the plane can keep nesting and nested and nested, right? So you can maybe just say, okay, the nested depth is only 3. You can go much deeper than that. And then the maximum depth of the payload, right? The parse actions supported, again, you can configure this. So again, you have all of this configuration, user-defined policy that you can drive the behavior of how you want to protect the API. We also have redact policy, which you can use to redact certain sensitive data again. So in addition to that, you can also use redact policy. So how do that? Again, you can use a JSON data path. So I can say I want to redact, for example, if message body has social security number, right? I may want to redact that. So I can also do that too. So this is another redact policy that is very come into very helpful friendly. I would like to have I will have loved to show you what our GraphQL support will do. So let's see whether we have time to do that. Let's do that, and then let's look at the API. Okay, again, let's define an API. And a GraphQL, in this case, let's create a GraphQL. We want a GraphQL API. We want to showcase some of the security what we have. So we have a GraphQL endpoint.